We go. We'll go ahead and get started. So first, I just want to begin by taking a moment to acknowledge that the Washington State Historical Society is located on the traditional lands of the Puyallup people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, and I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where you all are joining us from today. Just, standard Zoom protocols, please stay muted while our presenter is speaking. We hope that you will have questions and we'd like you to introduce yourself in the chat. So if you could take a second in the next few minutes to just drop your name and your organization in the chat, that would be great. We also know that you have lots of experience, some of you, with setting up a program at your museum for copyright and licensing images and that sort of thing. So feel free to use that chat to both ask questions and share stories or information. I will be sending out a follow-up email in the next day or two with the link to this recording and any other resources that people share in that chat or that Nicolette would like me to share with all of you. So definitely feel free to use that chat generously. I will keep an eye on it, and once Nicolette is done with her kind of formal presentation, we'll direct those questions to her, and I'll be happy to kind of moderate that. I think that's it for kind of Zoom details. We're all experts now, I know. I did want to mention a few upcoming Common Concerns programs that I hope you'll join us for. On February 23rd, we're going to be doing a program about building virtual tours. I think we talked about digital programs and virtual tours like way back in April or May, but so many more of us have done them now and figured out how to do them, and there are more resources and more free apps and more tips and hints that we can all learn from. So we're going to bring together some folks from 3 museums, Fort Nisqually, the Duval Historical Society, and the Tacoma Historical Society, to just talk you through how they built different virtual tours for their sites using different apps and programs that are pretty commonly available. And then on March 2nd, we have a program about accessing lodging tax funds. Some of you, I'm sure, have a lot of experience trying to get your hands on this money from your local or county lodging tax advisory committees. We'll have Steph Lyle from the Harbor History Museum and John Shaw from Westport here. Both have a lot of experience, both on LTAC committees and then also just kind of applying to different lodging tax funds. So you won't want to miss that. And Len has dropped those links in the chat there so you can register for those. So I think that's all my kind of business that I wanted to share. And so I'll go ahead and introduce our presenter today. Nicolette Bromberg has worked with photograph collections for more than 25 years. She is currently the visual materials curator for the University of Washington Library's Special Collections. Prior to that, she was the visual materials curator at the Wisconsin Historical Society, and before that, photo archivist for the Kansas collection at the University of Kansas. She has taught courses on management of photograph collections and on understanding photographs as historic documents. She is the author of 4 books: Wisconsin Revisited, Then and Now, the Wisconsin Sesquicentennial, Rephotography, sorry, I was so determined to get sesquicentennial right, I forgot to keep reading. The Wisconsin Sesquicentennial Rephotography Project, Picturing the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition, the photographs of Frank H. Noel, and Shadows of a Fleeting World, Pictorial Photography, and the Seattle Camera Club. So we're delighted to have Nicolette here. I know some of you have encountered her and come to her with questions about things here and there. And so I know that she has a lot of great information to share with us. So put those questions in the chat and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Nicolette.
Hi all. I see that intro is a little bit old because I actually have been doing this 39 years now. So I counted it up recently and was shocked to find that out. But I'm amazed that everybody, all these people came. This is pretty awesome. So I hope that what I have to tell you will be helpful. I know everybody has a different kind of archive. Everybody has different strains and stresses and ability to do something. So I'm hoping that some of what I say you can translate over to what your operation is. So licensing photos isn't just filling out some forms. It's sales, psychology, and sometimes the resilience to stand up to people. You really have to be secure in your licensing business, and you need to know what the rules are. And you also should know that you're not going to make a lot of money licensing. I mean, we have a big operation, and while we do bring things in, it's not going to be the fountain of gold. It's nice to have a little bit of extra money, but don't think things are just going to pour in and make you really rich. So first I want to talk about before you license anything, and that is your collection. And you need to be sure that you actually have the right to make copies and license the images. So is your collection in order? Do you have copies that are from other archives or other institutions? You need to identify copies from other places clearly and not issue copies of them unless you've been given permission from that institution. If someone wants to order a copy that you have from another institution, you should require that researcher to contact the actual archive that owns the image and have them ask for permission from that archive, which they then would send to you. For example, we have a collection that contains photographs that are clearly marked as coming from the University of Alaska. And normally I take copies out of our collection, but these photos came so long ago in the 60s that I didn't want to take them out of the collection because they'd already been used. But what we do is we clearly mark that they are from another institution, and we send the patrons first to University of Alaska. And sometimes Alaska will actually send them back to us because they can't find the photos. So we end up making the copies anyway. But you should be very clear that you are not issuing copies that come from a different institution. So your collection. Do you have donor forms that have transferred both the physical and the copyrights to your institution? If not, then you need to have patrons contact the copyright holder when people want copies and use of the images. You should use donor forms that include the transfer of copyright to your institution. And I will stop here to say we all have stuff in our collection that we have no idea where it came from. That's just a condition of archives. We know that. But when you're starting from here on out, you need to have forms when something comes in, and those forms need to transfer copyright to you. You need to also know that the only copyrights a donor can transfer are the ones that they own. So if you get a family collection that has photographs by the donor's mother, that donor would be the heir if she's deceased and can give you copyright. But if that collection contains photos that were not made by the family member, say by a commercial studio, then you do not have copyright to it. So just because someone signs a form giving you copyright does not necessarily mean that they own any copyright in it. They're only giving you copyright to what they own copyright for. So, and many donors actually have donated collections for which they have no copyright. So, but it's very important that when you do get something from someone, you have them sign copyright over to you. Once in a while, you'll get someone who wants to keep their copyright. And you can get around this by making what's called a Nerf Agreement, N-E-R-F, which means a non-exclusive royalty-free agreement. And that means that there's language in that agreement that allows the copyright holder to keep the copyright, but at the same time gives you, the institution, the right to do whatever you want with the images. So although, say, the photographer wants to keep the copyright, with a NERF, you can turn around and license those images without going back to the copyright holder. You can make this agreement in the reverse manner too. You are given the copyright and you turn around and you give a NERF to the donor. For example, we were given a collection by the widow of a photographer, and she wanted to do a book on him. So we gave her a NERF so that she could do whatever she wanted without coming to us. So although we own the collection and the copyrights, she doesn't have to come back to us for the right to use it. Copyright is very complicated, and I'll give you three words that are very important words for copyright. Peter Hirtle, Hirtle, and the word copyright. And if you put Peter Hirtle and the word copyright into a Google search, you will get Peter Hirtle's copyright chart, which is called Copyright Term and the Public Domain in the United States. This is an invaluable resource that he updates every year. This is the resource that explains the very complex copyright terms. And by the way, I use this all the time. So one of the things is that people confuse the term public domain with the idea that they can freely use something that they think is out of copyright. Actually, just because something's out of copyright does not mean they could come to your institution and use it without your permission. What public domain means is that something is out of copyright. So if I happen to go into Goodwill and I get a book and there's an image in it which is out of copyright, because I own that book, I can take that image and I could issue it because it's out of copyright. But I cannot walk into your archive and use your stuff without your permission just because it's in the public domain. And a lot of people are very confused about what public domain means. You still own the images and you still control them. So once in a while, we'll have someone who'll say, well, I can use that because it's in the public domain. And we say, no, it belongs to us and you need permission from us, whether or not it's in copyright. So there are actually two different issues. One is who owns it, and one is it still held under copyright? So there are many, many different copyright situations. It's actually quite complex. And in his chart, he has never published, never registered works, works registered or first published in the US, and then works from outside, registered outside the US. So the two categories are the most important. Under those categories are many subcategories. So for example, it's quite bizarre, but if you don't know who wrote something, let's say a book, it's an anonymous book, and you don't know when the death of the author was because it's an anonymous book, it's still in copyright from 1900 on, which is kind of ludicrous because you don't know who the copyright holder is. But if you look at this chart and you have something that's anonymous, it's still in copyright, you know, from 1900 on. I mean, that's just a kind of crazy situation, but and most of the time, truly, since we don't know who it is and you don't know when they died, that's just irrelevant, really, to your situation. I would ignore that because somebody who came out of the woodwork and said, well, hey, I did that, they would have to prove it in the first place. And it's just an unlikely situation. So for work published in the United States before 1925, and this is published, there's a difference between whether something was published or unpublished. So if it was published before 1925, copyright has expired. So if you have something that's dated before 1925 and it's published, then you have no problem. Work that was published from 1925 to 1977 without a copyright notice is considered out of copyright, and so on. There are many other situations. So it's quite complicated because, well, how are you going to tell? You have to have the original work to see if it had a copyright. Did it have a copyright notice? Did it not have a copyright notice? And this becomes obviously more complicated when you're talking about photos because no, most of the time, you know, the vast majority of photos are not going to have a copyright notice on them. I mean, there are very few photos that end up with a copyright notice on them. So it is a complicated thing. And the basic problem with photos is you can't really tell if it was ever published. It's for the majority of them. You can with photos that appeared in newspapers or books, but with many photos, you really don't know. For example, we have photos of the collapse of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Well, we know those were published. We know the day they were published. and they are out of copyright because we know when that happened. So even if we have a photograph of it that doesn't have a copyright notice, we know specifically that those were published. But with many photos, you just don't know. You don't know if they were published. They may have been, they may not have been. So that kind of leaves you with the category of unpublished works, which is the life of the author plus 70 years. So you would have to know that the creator died before 1950. So if it was an unpublished work, which maybe you could look at a lot of photos that way, and you know that the creator died before 1950, then you're in the out of copyright phase. And really, copyright is insanely difficult to figure out. So we in the archives are basically left with either you don't let anybody use anything, or you just use common sense to decide if you are safe in allowing use. Many of us have images that just have no paperwork or no record of ownership to fall back on, or it's not indicated who the photographer is. So what I do in my archive, because I'm not just going to close it down and say, oh, nobody can use anything because I have no idea if there's copyright here. So I fall back on what I call the Wisconsin frozen lake theory of copyright. When I'm trying to figure out whether I need to be concerned about the copyright issue when there's no indication of the copyright holder. I lived in Wisconsin for some years, and being from the Northwest, I had never seen a frozen lake in the winter like they have in Wisconsin. And so I had my first experience walking out on a frozen lake. So the key to being safe on a frozen lake is to stay away from the thin ice, and then you're okay. So copyright is used mainly to get money. So when trying to decide whether it's questionable to allow something to be used, you look for thin ice. And that would be famous events, famous photographers, modern works, because modern works will be in copyright. So for example, we recently acquired a collection of slides from a geologist, which were of the eruption of Mount St. Helens. And in going through the collection, I found that he had also included slides from other photographers. He could not give us the rights to those images. And of course, these are modern photos, fairly modern. So you need to be careful about letting anybody use them. So we would make people go get the photographer's permission. But within that collection were the very famous photos of the actual explosion, which were made by Gary Rosenquist. I actually removed the slides from the collection and destroyed them because they're copies of very famous photos, and they're everywhere. You can see it, just go on the internet, you can see it. And there's no need to keep those. We were not providing any research to anybody, because anybody wanting to see those can just go right to the internet. And Gary Rosenquist has made a lot of money, and no way would I ever issue a copy of those to anyone, because that's a famous event, and that's the kind of thing you want to keep away from, and he's making a lot of money from it. So really, I didn't even want to keep that in my collection. There was no need to, because I'm not helping a researcher by showing them copies of some famous photos which they can see anywhere. In another example, we were given a collection of photographs of opera theater and other entertainment stars from the 1970s. The donor had no copyrights for the collection. Since all the photos were publicity photos, meaning they were done by commercial photographers, and even several of them were done by a famous photographer, and the photographs were modern, I do not even allow any copies of these to be made. People have to come. We don't even have it digitized and on our digital site. People will have to come, look at the finding aid, and come and see them, because they're all in copyright, and they're famous photographers, and they're just like totally thin ice. We're not going to deal with it. We can hang on to it, and in time, when many years pass, then the collection will be okay for us to use. But right now, this is not something that I would even play with, and including to the level that I won't even put them on our digital site. But if, on the other hand, for most of us, the photograph is anonymous or by a local studio or local family, maybe long since gone, or something relatively common, I would probably allow it to be used. Basically, I'm looking for the case where there really isn't any reason that anybody could come back and say, oh, I own copyright to this. And truthfully, in all the almost 40 years that I've done this, I've only had 2 inquiries about our photographs. And one was, we put a photograph up we knew nothing about, we put it on our digital site, and all it said was Jones. We knew nothing about it. And I got a phone call from Gary Jones, and it turned out that Jones Studio was a studio in Aberdeen, and it was a 4th-generation studio. And I said, oh, we'll take that down. We didn't know. And that was the sum total of it. We took it down and they were happy. And there was absolutely no problem. And the other time was a person who contacted me, a person who was in Olympia, and she had bought a collection of photographs, and photographs which there were copies in a lot of different archives, including ours. And she came and she claimed she owned the copyright to it. And I said, well, because she purchased the collection. And I said, I'll be glad to talk to you about it if you will give me the proof that you own the copyright. And I know that she harassed a lot of archives in Olympia about this, but I just said, give me the proof that you own the copyright, and I'll be glad to talk to you about it. And she never came back. But those are the only times ever anybody inquired at all about copyright. So I'm just going to make a note. Oh, I will go back because I noticed somebody asked, what is modern times? And I basically think that modern is going to be past 1950s because you're getting into copyright there. So I just wanted to make a note, which is beyond the base of my talk, but I think it is good to note that it's also the duty of the archive to deal with any culturally sensitive or restricted images and make sure that those are indicated somehow in a way that people know they shouldn't be copied. So they're marked very clearly, like if you have volunteers working for you or something, that they're marked very clearly that they shouldn't be used. So if you are going to put images on a website, don't put up high resolution scans unless you are not going to make copies for patrons and you want them to take them from your site. If you don't care about who will use them, because they will be used without your permission, then that's fine. We use on our digital site 100 DPI scans, which are very low res, and they can be used maybe in a newsletter, but they can't be used in books and films. They're just not good enough. And the people come to us for high resolution scans for our images. So think about that if you're making a site. Do you want people to be able to download and just use them without your permission, or do you want them to come to you for the high resolution images? So now getting to providing images. So one thing that I do believe is very important is, if possible, try to have only one person handle this business. This is a business. Licensing or providing reproductions or whatever you're doing is a business. So have one person be the person who does this, who takes the order, who deals with the public. If you have a lot of different people take the orders, it gets very confusing. They tell people very different things. They promise them things. And then you end up having to backtrack, and you end up having to kind of get out of the morass of what they told them. So if the person who is dealing with that service is not there at the time when you have a patron, you simply tell them that that person will get back to them. And I strongly suggest that you give yourself a separate email for the business. We have a separate email, photos@uw.edu. And it's for our reproduction and permission service. And we keep that from being confused with our reference and other questions. So this gives the patron an address. So you can say, I'm sorry, the person who does it isn't in today, but you can send your question to this particular address. And if that person leaves or changes, it doesn't matter, because it's not a personal email address. It's a business email address. So it means that you can change out the people who are dealing with your business. Another thing that I strongly suggest is that you use identification numbers. Can you find photos in your collection easily? Make sure you're not making copies of copies of copies because you couldn't find this one, or you couldn't find that one. Oh, I have a copy of this, I'll copy this copy. Use the original image at all, if at all possible. So it's important to have identification numbers for the images that you copy. If there are any issues with the patron, you can immediately identify the image. For example, a person might say, oh, you sent me the wrong image. So with an ID number, you could go back to the image and check to confirm this. Also, if you keep the original scan like we do, you don't have to pull out the image to provide a new scan. And by the way, we charge the same whether or not we have to pull the original photo to scan it, or if we're using an image from our image bank. We still have to do the same amount of work. We have to go through dealing with the patron and doing paperwork and yada, yada, yada. So there's no difference to us if we already happen to have a high-res scan in our image bank, or if we have to make a high-res scan. If you don't have a numbering system, that actually doesn't matter. You can create it, reproduction number, when you make scans. So while we actually do have collection numbers for our images, we don't use those numbers for our business. What we do is we use negative numbers, which identify an image that has been scanned for some kind of reproduction reasons, or for a permission. And we keep a database of our negative numbers which identifies where the image came from, what collection it was from, where it's located, and what the negative number was. And let me tell you, this is such a handy thing. You can't believe how handy it is to be able to go back into that database, particularly when you have people who've gotten the negative number wrong. We have a patron who's kind of incompetent at what he's doing, and who recently sent a large order, and he had some of the negative numbers wrong. But because I could look at the negative database and then compare them and find out, you know, what the image was because it was described in the database, I was able to figure out how it was incorrect. It's really, really helpful. We write the number on the back of the photograph. So like UW12345 is the number. And we write that in pencil on the back of the photograph, and then obviously have that in our database. So that number is only for our reproduction system. So I strongly suggest that you do that you have numbers, because it's extremely helpful when you're trying to go back and you're trying to find that image, or somebody has referred to it, or somebody is, you know, says, I saw that somewhere and it was blah, blah, and here's the number. And, oh, I saw it in this book. So you don't spend hours looking through your collection trying to find the original image. So another thing you need to do is to have forms. You know, people don't like forms, but the truth is you need forms. So you need to require them to fill out a form to request a reproduction or a permission. So there's reproduction means that they're ordering a scan. We keep separate forms, and maybe you have a way that you want to put them together, but we keep separate forms. And so if a person is only ordering something, then we use that reproduction form. We use the permission form for them to say what they're using it for. And that's when we keep these separate. We keep them separate because we may have somebody who orders 20 photographs, and then they come back in 6 months and they say, I want to use these 6 in the book. So we're only giving permission for those 6. So it's easier for us not to confuse the fact that they ordered 20 photos because they're not getting permission to use 20 photos. They only want permission to use 6 photos, which is why we have a separate form. And one thing that is really, really important, never, never, never sign a form that comes from an outside institution, meaning you will get forms from book publishers and TV people in particular. Those are the 2 places that pretty much the 2 places where you will get outside forms sent to you. Never sign those forms. You're signing all kinds of rights away, and there's no need to sign those forms. You just tell them that they have to sign your form. And in all the years I've done this, there was only one time a TV producer said, well, we can't use the image if you don't sign our form. And to which I said, okay, that's fine. And, you know, no, we're still not going to give you permission, and we're not going to sign your form, you know. And so it's no big deal. We number our forms with a job number, and we actually refer to that in our letter of permission. And so we can file our jobs just like any business. So the forms have a job number, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, whatever that is. And we keep all our forms permanently as proof that the patron has agreed to our conditions and proof of what we allowed them to use and what the purpose was that they used them for. So the forms and the correspondence are kept as business records. They're not somebody's correspondence. It's the business records for the reproduction and permission business. So I want to show you our form. If I can do this, we'll go to share screen. I'm hoping this will work. Let's see. Where are you? No, I don't see you.
You're missing your share screen button.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm not in basic. Oh, I am in basic. Let's see. No, I don't want downloads. I don't want that. I have something that's up here. Let's see if I can get to it this way. I'm trying to show you our form. And why can I not show you our form, even though I have it pulled up? Oh, wait a minute. I think I might have gotten one of them. There. Okay.
There we go.
So this is our permission for use form. And, you know, this is just ours and we tinker with it all the time. But the front of it is basically the contract. People are making a contract with us. And so the front of it is a contract, and you notice they put their signature down. Can you all see? Did I share properly?
Yep, we can see fine.
Okay, good. Okay, so what we have is in the permission, you may use the images for what's described down below in the project description. And in the credit line, we talk about the credits they have to give. And sometimes if it's a book, they have to agree to give us a publication. That you don't have to do that, but we get copies, and then there's a liability. A fee right there. You agree to pay all fees incurred with this request. And then down here is just a description of, so this is where they can describe what they're using it for. And here they can say they're a nonprofit, or they can say they're a UW person, their nonprofit identification number. So you see book and catalog. So we have a variegated cost. So if you're only publishing 3,000, we don't charge you as much as if you're publishing 100,000. So here we have different kinds of stuff, video and film, other uses such as signage, and we include things that we wouldn't necessarily charge for also. And then here they put the negative numbers. And right here, I am not ordering reproductions at this time. I understand this is for permission only, and I am also submitting one. That's just so they understand we have two forms. So let me see if I can get to, I'm going to stop share for a minute, and I'm going to try to, this is reproduction request. Okay, I'm going to try to share our reproduction request form. Oops, I got to go to share screen, sorry. Technically challenged here. I think I got it. Okay, so here is their request. You see, here's where the order number is. So we know the job number. And here again, the front is the contract. And here you understand that these are for reference only. So when we're providing a scan, we're only providing it for reference. We're not providing it for any use. And you may not sell, reproduce, publish, display, blah, 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 or allow others. And if you want to use them for non-reference purposes, you come back to us, and so on and so forth. And fees. And it's real important that they understand there are fees. So I understand that prepayment will be required for all reproduction fees, and they check that off. So, and then here is just what they're ordering. This tells you just, here's the negative number description and tells you what they're ordering. Okay. Stop share. Okay. And I'm back. Let's see. Okay. One thing I would tell you, if you're going to put categories of use, don't use the term educational. Educational doesn't mean anything. People will say all the time, this is for educational use. Well, Macmillan, who oftentimes publishes over 100,000 copies of their textbooks, those are for educational purposes. So educational doesn't mean anything. So I would stay away from using that as one of your categories. So decide on your, I'm sorry, I skipped something. Once a person has requested to use an image, we issue a letter of permission, which details what was used, what it will be used for, and gives our required credit line. Our credit line includes the negative number. So if someone sees an image in a publication and wants to use it, we can find that image easily. It's such a lifesaver, because when we have someone who gets some old book that had no credit in there, then we have to root through all our collections and try to figure out what it is. If we get a negative number, we can find it instantly. So let me tell you, having that in the credit line is so important. We have a template with the letters, which we just have to fill in a few things for the permission. And I can try. Let me try for a minute just to halt for a minute to see if I can get the letter. If we can see one of the letters. Okay, I have it open now. Let's see if we can actually see it. Whoops. How do I get it big? Okay. So hopefully you can see this letter. Share screen. Letter. I think this is it. Okay. Share. Can you see this? So here's a letter that we sent out. This is the job number, and this is who ordered it. And this is McGraw-Hill, and we gave them non-exclusive world rights for one-time use for this image, which is this picture. And this is the book, an ebook that it was in. And here's the credit line. And we asked for a contribution of a copy. And so that's what our letter looks like. And we change it if it's for a film. We have a little bit different text, but essentially, and this is all pretty much a template, and we can just fill in this part and who it is. And so it's pretty easy for us to do these letters. You could make a form. You could look and make a form, which is your permission letter if you want, just a brief form. But I strongly advocate for it because it's very clear. It goes to the patron. They know what they have the right to use. They know the credit line they're supposed to use. So it's very clear. You're not just, hey, here's this image and yeah, you can go ahead and use it. That's one of the reasons. That's the reason that we do this, because also a lot of places, big time places like McGraw-Hill, they actually expect a letter when you're working with really big companies or documentary filmmakers or stuff. A lot of times they actually expect to get a letter. So on fees, you want to decide what your fees are, and you need to be very clear about them. So our reproduction fees for scans are the same for everyone. We do not give anyone any reproduction, no matter who it is, any reductions in the fees, no matter who it is. It is one fee, and we never change that for anyone, whether it's a professor, whether it's one of us on the staff, or an outside person. If you do have some category of patron that you're providing free scans for, make sure that's clearly stated in your fee schedule. And you have to be careful, again, about the way you word it. For example, if your archive happens to be in City Hall and you provide free scans to City Hall employees for their work, Be sure to write this up clearly. Otherwise, you will be providing free scans to any employee of the City Hall for personal reasons. Don't just say free scans for City Hall employees. You want to be specific about who is getting these free scans. And there are plenty of archives that work within a system and they have to give free scans or whatever. But you need to delineate that, and you need to be very clear who it is and in what circumstance are they getting free scans. And then for our permission fees, we have a sliding scale because we have so many different classes of clients using our materials. So a large publisher, for example, who is publishing 100,000 copies is charged far more than a publisher who is publishing 3,000 copies, which will be quite small fee. We don't charge nonprofits. That's those who can provide us a nonprofit number. We also don't charge a permission fee to someone who's making a small personal book that maybe would have like 100 copies or something, any kind of small, personal, where they obviously are not going to be making any money. We don't charge for talks or events, things like that. But even if we don't charge a use fee, say the person who's making their personal book for 100 copies, they still have to fill out the form and we send them a letter because they still need permission from us to use the images, and we still need to record what is being used. And one of the good things about doing this is that I can easily go right into my database of permission letters and say, this is how many permissions we did this year. This is how many were for nonprofit, no fee. This is how many were for fee. You can follow the use of your collection. Oh, well, look at this. We have a lot of publishers, high-end publishers using it. Oh no, look, we have a lot of this kind or this kind. So you can really use it for statistics or monitoring how your collection is used. So definitely publish your fee schedule on your website. And this way, no one can get special treatment because it's out there, it's published, everybody knows what it is. And remember that you need to calculate for state tax. So if your fee is $25, you're going to have to put state tax on it. And if you're not sure, you should go and find out because you are issuing something which is taxed. So make certain that you're putting the tax fee in there, because otherwise your institution will not be getting $25 because your institution will have to pay taxes. That was one of the things that I discovered when I first came here was that they hadn't added in the tax to the they just said it's, let's say, $25. So they were losing, actually we were losing more than that because the university charges 15.6%. So we were losing that money as well as the tax money. So now we, if it's $25, it's 25 plus the university fee plus the tax fee. So it's important to remember that you do have to look at taxes. So very important, always get prepayment before giving a patron a reproduction or a permission. Invoice them before doing the work. This is very, very important. Many years ago, when I worked at the Kansas collection, when I first came to work at the Kansas collection, it was a very small, had a small photo reproduction operation. And there was a lab on campus that did the work. And so the Kansas collection, we would take the photos over there and they do the work. And then they would bill us, but they didn't get prepayment. So the Kansas collection was in the red for all this money where people simply didn't pay. And so the very first thing I did was said, not going to do anything until we have prepayment, because you end up paying for it. And let me tell you, people will walk out all the time and not pay. And so it's very important that you don't do any work until you get payment. And if you want, also, you can charge rush fees. If the patron wants to have images quickly, you could add on a rush fee, because this means that the person is moved up to the front of the queue. Now, obviously, if you only have one reproduction every 6 weeks, this isn't going to be a difficulty. But when you have a business like ours, or like in Wisconsin Historical, where we had a lot of work, the person is asking to be put in front of the queue. So they have to pay for it. So when I was at the Wisconsin Historical Society, really, we had a lot of business before I left. We were doing like $100,000. And so that was a lot of work. And that was before the digital era. So this is printing these in the darkroom. So what we did was we used rush fees to control the flow. And rush fees help to make the patron decide how soon they really want the image. We had so much work that we had a 4-week turnaround. So if you were willing to wait 4 weeks, you paid the regular fee for a reproduction. If you wanted to only wait 3 weeks, then it was double the reproduction cost. If you wanted it within 2 weeks, it was 3 times the reproduction cost. And if you wanted it within 1 week, it was 4 times the cost. Now, eventually what we had to do was add another fee, which was less than a week, which was 4 times the original cost plus $100. And this came from patrons saying, oh, I have to have this immediately. I have to have this immediate, blah, 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 blah. And then they never bothered to get it. So if we were going to really rush that much, they had to pay for it. The people who want it will pay for it. And that takes care of people who say, oh, I need this immediately. And then, I really didn't need it that soon, So, if they want it, if they really, really want it, they will pay. And I can tell you, we had at Wisconsin Historical Society, we had a request from a TV network for views of the Peshtigo fire, which probably none of you have ever heard of, but in fact, it's the largest fire in the United States. And the reason you never heard of it is because it happened on the same day as the Chicago fire. So there were some big fires going on, and they wanted them for their TV news, and they wanted them that day. And we had to find the photos, print them in our photo lab, and get them out the door in express mailing service. So we charged them $1,000 for this, and they paid because they legitimately needed them, and they prepaid because they wanted them, they needed them. So, rush fees are very, very useful because they weed out the people who are going to make your life miserable.
Nicolette?
Yes.
We have a fair number of questions, so
Okay.
maybe just a few more minutes to wrap up and then.
Yeah, I'm getting close.
Perfect.
And then I can answer a whole bunch of stuff. So I would say use psychology in business. First, set up a turnaround time that is longer than you need. This allows you to fix mistakes that you might make. And if you get the reproduction to the person sooner than your turnaround time, they're very happy with you. So like our turnaround time is 2 weeks, but we often are done within a week, and that keeps the patrons happy. And it is particularly important to set up your system and keep to it. While most people who want images are easy to work with, you will eventually encounter a patron from hell. This is a person who tries to circumvent the system for his own purposes. This person will try to get special treatment or pressure you or find some chink in your system to get what they want. This is why it is important to have a clear system in place and people in your organization who understand how to do and how to respond to patrons. If you start giving preferential treatment to some, others will come to you asking for the same. Remember, you can say no. This is a business transaction, so you need to leave your desire to please people at home. While we do try to do our best to serve our patrons, you do not need to give everyone what they want. You offer certain services under your published guidelines. If someone is pressuring you for an exception that is not within your operational guidelines, walk away from the situation politely. If the patron doesn't, if the patron doesn't want to follow those guidelines, then I say, fine, that's your choice. If you have someone working on the business who does not feel they can say no, then have them say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. You will have to speak to X. Create a mental wall for the patrons who press you. Create a no wall and respond to, but what if we do it this way? What if we do it that way? You still respond no. I happen to use the state will not allow us. That's a great one because nobody can argue with it. You are not losing anything if you lose a patron this way. I can tell you that a patron like that is far more trouble than they're worth. we have a patron who's been constantly trying to get us to give him access to our collections. During this time when we're closed for COVID, he's gone all the way up to the top level at UW to try to have us let him in the door when we ourselves can't even go into our own department. And we just tell him no. We just say no, and you're not going to get this. And he does the same thing with his permission request, which he filled out wrong. He wanted us just to ignore that and just let me use it this way. And we said no. We just come back and say no. So in the end, the best advice I can give you is to review your collection before you start licensing, so you know which images you can license, and to have a system in place that has clear rules and standards for operation. It will save you a lot of grief to have a system. Be aware that if you think you are doing something nice for someone to bypass the system, you can have unforeseen consequences. When I was in Wisconsin, I ended up in the middle of a dispute of two factions of a small local historical society because my archive held the original glass plates for a big collection from that town. A person from that local historical society decided she was going to issue postcards of the images from their prints, and they allowed her to go ahead. However, she got into a dispute with others in the historical society who later decided they wanted to stop her. Unfortunately, they had never bothered with any paperwork giving her permission to use the image, but she said, well, she had verbal permission. So I kept getting calls from lawyers about the collection. So the moral here is that even for people within your organization, they need to follow the procedures you have set up. When I wrote the two books I wrote here using our images, I was careful to submit an application for permission form, even though I am the person who issues permissions. I wanted to make sure that my use of the images was documented properly and that I followed our system like any other patron. So if you have questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nicolette. That was just some wonderful information. So we do have a handful of questions here, but just for everybody who's on the line, we may run a few minutes over 3 o'clock. If you need to sign off, no problem. Again, this recording will be available so you can get all that additional information later. So questions from Eric. Are digital photos and images owned by public institutions like state museums and university collections and state agencies part of the public record and therefore freely accessible and usable by anyone? And I'd like to wrap into that question just a general kind of overview of fair use when people can use things without paying for permission.
Well, first, digital has many meanings. An original digital photo, or do you mean a photograph that we digitized and put on our site? If we digitized an original thing, that's not a digital photo. That's just a surrogate that we digitized to put up on our site. And just because we put it up on our site doesn't mean people can use it without permission. What it means to be a state institution is that patrons can come in and use our materials. It doesn't mean that we have to give it to them for free. Fair use is very limited. And it has very specific meanings, like you use only a portion of it. You know, if you copy something, you can use 10% of it. Well, 10% of a photograph, you know, is kind of weird. So it as a state institution, we are mandated to help people, which we do all the time. And the same thing with public records. You know, we are here to make sure that people have access to those public records. And we provide access for when people come into our reference area and they can see the records. It doesn't mean that we have to necessarily give it to them for free, unless there's a very specific thing that says you will provide free copies. That would have to be specifically in the law.
Great, thank you. So a follow-up kind of to that question from Eric, what recourse does an institution have if it discovers someone is using one of its images in a money-making venture, like a book or a product, like a TV t-shirt or a coffee mug or something like that?
You can send them a bill. You know, we don't have any recourse, truthfully, but we actually had this wacky thing happen where some crazy woman decided that one of our old Hague photos looked like Greta, we had Greta, somebody who's this young woman who's in the climate if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so some woman thought that one of our Hague photos, looked like her in 1898, and people appropriated our image. And every time we found it, we just send them a bill. It went all over the world, in news outlets and all kinds of stuff like that. And yeah, we just send them a bill. I mean, truthfully, we have no way of, you have no way of controlling it. The moment you put it up there on the internet, people are going to steal it and feel like they can, but you can get back. And we were paid. By the way, it was successful. It was successful when we build them. We build quite a few of those, places that we found used our image.
Great, interesting. So I think we answered Anne's question. I heard you say her question was, are you giving them the scans before they sign the permission form? And it sounds like you never give them anything until they sign the forms, right?
Oh, zero.
Yeah.
Until they pay. Not only do they have to sign the forms, but they have to pay. We won't even start the order until they pay.
Right. Great. Brian was asking if the Pickett photos are all owned by UW. Do you know, are you familiar with that particular?
Oh yeah, yeah.
collection?
Sadly, they're really badly deteriorated. They're on their way out because most of them were nitrate negatives, and it's very sad, but the collection is dying quite rapidly.
Have those been digitized at all or not?
Well, yeah, we do. Ironically, this is ironic. They were digitized actually even before. I've been here 20 years, and they were digitized before I came. And now that's actually all we have left of some of the images where the negatives have deteriorated so badly. Yeah. We have kind of proof, we have a negative that we printed a few years ago versus the digital version of it. And it's very sad.
Great. We have a couple more good questions here. How does the Public Records Act come into play for public institutions?
I don't know in what manner.
I'm not sure either. Aaron,
we're there to be the public record, so that means we have to make public records accessible. So definitely that's part of our charge, is to open them for people to go through.
Right. And I guess that means that people could request even like your forms or things, public records request, all the documentation here.
Yeah. Sure. Now, I don't think, however, that they could request our files, because that would be private information. I think, once you've filled out the form, we keep those files. We keep those permanently. But I don't think that would be a part of that. I mean, yes, we have a lot of our records are part of public records, but there are certain things that are private that you can't, that are closed. And we actually have things in the public records that are closed because they have social security numbers or something that should not go out.
Gotcha. Yeah, and Aaron, if you need more clarification on that, definitely just follow up. So Groover out at Fort Walla Walla, I believe, was asking, we have some photos made by an Army photographer in World War II for the Army, also paintings by an illustrator that were made for postage stamps. In situations like these, is the government the copyright holder?
Definitely with the Army, absolutely. And so you're okay because that's a government agency. Anything from a government agency is not under copyright. You're fine. The one thing that you should do, though, is make sure that you check the photos and none of them say restricted. If they are restricted, you can get that restriction lifted. We actually have a person on our campus, whenever I encounter that, and I just send the photo to them and say, can we get this lifted? At the illustrator, if you can find out any information, if the illustrator was doing what's called work for hire, it also would be part of the governmental record. I would guess this is kind of where Wisconsin frozen lake theory of copyright comes in. If this illustrator ended up to be Norman Rockwell, I would be really careful, some really, really famous person. But if this is an illustrator and you search the person and you find, there isn't much on him or something, it's probable that this was a work for hire and therefore was a government thing. And sometimes you just kind of have to go with the flow. We just can't know everything.
Sure, yeah. So Anne asks a question that I'm sure is on lots of folks' minds. What about doorstop donations, which I'm assuming means those things that just get left at your institution and you maybe have no paperwork on, she's asking if you should just avoid providing reproductions and licensing, since you really, and let me know, Anne, if I mischaracterized that question, but.
Is that what you mean, things that are just left?
And is that right? You can unmute yourself if you want to, if you're still with, oh yeah, yep, things that are just kind of left.
Well, we fortunately now pretty much have donor forms for everything. We don't have too much of that, somebody walking in the door and just dropping something off. You know, usually they contact me, but there's a lot of stuff from the past that we have, lots of that stuff from the past. And this is where I guess I go back to the Wisconsin frozen lake theory of copyright. The thing is that, are you going to decide, well, we'll just close these for 100 years, you know, which seems kind of extreme? Or are you going to take that chance that these are images that you could go ahead and let people use? And it goes back to that theory, which is, are these images that are not famous events after the 1950s, you know, famous people, famous photographers? You have to be careful because there are famous photographers out there too. So, you know, do your research, see if you can find out anything about them. Kind of do your best work. But I mean, I'm in the inclination, I think most of us in the field want to help people. Yes, you could close it down. That is your prerogative, and you could do that if you're worried. I kind of follow, I'm going to go for it. And so far, over 40 years, nobody's ever come back and said, oh my God, you can't use that. And particularly, like I said, if they fall into that strong, thick ice where it's unlikely that there's a reason, because remember, if anybody's going to come after you for copyright, it's only two reasons. One, they're annoyed that you use their stuff, or two, they want money. And if they want money, you have to prove a lot of stuff to get any money. They would have to prove that they lost money. You know, you let some little pamphlet publish this. Well, there's no way they can prove that you lost money. Now, if you use the Gary Rosenquist photos, that's different, because he could prove, you know, loss of funds. So, and that's what I'm saying. That's where my theory comes about. Stay away from Gary Rosenquist's eruption of Mount St. Helens. But, you know, somebody on a bicycle on Main Street, it's unlikely that it's a problem.
Sure. So there's a little bit of risk assessment that you kind of have.
Yeah, it literally is. It's either that or just put it aside and don't use it for 100 years.
Sure. John Larson was wondering if UW, yay, John from Polson, are you offering prints for sale in addition to digital files? Do you make prints available as well?
We did when we were dealing with when it was the University Photo Lab, but when they closed it down and we went digital, we haven't. Although I personally would like to do that. If we could get the setup to do it, I would really like to do that. But at the moment, we aren't.
Okay, yeah. Groover asked about reasonable fees. I did put the link to your fee schedule off of the UW Special Collections website. And I'm guessing that you arrived at those fees probably after a little bit of tinkering and
looking around at other ones.
Yeah.
Kind of things. You know, I mean, there's a collection for which we charge $350 an image. That's our John Shelton collection. And that's a guy who was a geologist who was, those were his fees to textbook companies that he charged before the collection came to us. So we kept with that. But we don't charge for our other collections. We don't charge that. Although over 100,000 copies, we charge a couple $100, I think. Okay. Anyway, it has to do with how many copies.
Yeah. Okay, great. So back to Aaron's question about public records. Hopefully this will help. And Aaron, I might just have you come off the microphone and clarify it for us. For example, public records are not subject to sales tax. Also, public records are required to be provided for certain very small fees. So is the question if images in your collection are considered public records, Aaron?
So yeah, so as a city of Lacey, we are subject to the Public Records Act, and according to the powers that be, we have to give away basically our photos for 10 cents a piece.
Does it actually say 10 cents a piece?
It
Because
does. Yeah, it says in the
So
RCW.
this was written years before.
It's been recently updated though.
Really?
Yep.
At 10 cents? And who's the person who decided on 10 cents?
It's the state legislators.
So they know nothing about how you have to, because
That's right.
we are allowed to do, we're not making a profit. We are allowed to do cost recovery. And let me tell you, we have, it's not 10 cents. Cost recovery is not 10 cents. So
Yeah, if you're going to charge more, it says you have to fully document that. And it can't be that you use the staff fee for like a high level curator if someone who is an administrative assistant can do that. It says
right,
that.
right.
Yeah.
No, yeah, we have documented, we have documented what a recovery would be. And of course, you know, we're not like you, all our stuff is, we don't have that many public, I mean, we have public records, but we don't have that many uses of it. But, you know, if unfortunately, if you're stuck with a bureaucratic, you know, with bureaucrats who know nothing about it, I mean, that's ludicrous that you can only charge 10 cents. It probably costs 10 cents just to walk across the room and pick up the document.
Yeah, for sure. I
So
mean,
that's,
most of the time I don't charge because it's not even worth it.
no, why would you? Yeah, yeah.
Aaron, I'll look into see if I can find any information about how other kind of public museums are handling that and see if they're going through the work of kind of documenting a justification for a higher fee. I'll see if I can come up with anything.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was our legal advice. So
yeah, gotcha.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Nicolette, do you have time for a few more questions?
I have plenty of time. I'm at home.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, because we've got more coming in and they're all really great. So Linda asks, at our little museum, we have boxes of photos, some with information, some not. My question is, can I use for exhibits or need to do research to see if I can find if it's a copy whose collection it belongs to? So I think she's asking, again, to do that copyright research about using it internally for an exhibition. What would your advice be?
Well, I would say I wouldn't have any problem at all using it for an internal exhibition. One clue I can tell you, if your photographs are supposed to be historical, I mean pre-1950, like older, if they are have white edges, bright white, and blue blacks, they are copies. Because photographic paper in the 1950s was given optical brighteners. And so if you made a negative, say you printed a negative, and the negative was from 1898, but you printed it on paper in the 1950s and on, it will come out with these whites. But if you have original vintage print, it will not, it will be brownish and cream in color. So there's a very big difference. That's one clue when you have the black and white photos, is one clue that something's a copy. But I would have no problem with using them for an exhibit. We have there's an institution, the Yukon Archives, and they have a lot of our stuff. They've got copies of a lot of our stuff, and they use it in their exhibits all the time. And they're very good. When anybody wants to use them, they send the person to us, and they're very good about it. We're happy to. Like also, if you go to the Klondike Gold Rush Museum, most of the photos they have there are ours. They've gotten from us. So I don't think exhibiting them in your archive is a problem at all, because they're basically being used for reference work.
Great, thank you. So a question from Catherine. We have sports programs and brochures from the 1920s to the 2000s in our collection that people are interested in digital copies of. None of them have copyrights on them. So I'm trying to figure out if they fall under unpublished works or something else.
If they don't have copyrights, they would, if you don't mind, I'll bring up the hurdle chart. This is where the hurdle chart comes in, is really, really useful, because he covers everything, and that's why I live with this chart. Now, you're saying, give me the dates again.
Well, it sounds like they have some going back to the 1920s and then some more recent as the 2000s.
Okay, never published, never registered. Unpublished works where the death date is unpublished works, life of the author plus 70 years. Works from authors who died before 1950. So that's in unpublished. Now, published without here's the problem. What the heck does published mean? Because here's published without a copyright notice, 1925 through 1977. So that means anything up there. But when you get to modern, because they screwed up the copyright laws, everything from created before 1978 and first published in this period, March 1989 through 2002, 70 years from the death of the author. Works prepared. Yeah, so if you get to the modern ones, those are in copyright, but the older ones I wouldn't worry about at all. You don't have a copyright notice, and they look like they fit. I would look at that chart. They look like they fit into there. These are sports programs, so they're work for hire probably. And who owns it? The sports team? Yeah, that's kind of tricky because I do think the modern ones, I would be a little more circumspect about letting people use. If you've got the teams, if there are teams that still exist, maybe you send people and have them ask for permission. Send a letter to the team and say, can I get a digital copy from this institution? Yeah, this is where my theory comes in. I'd just be a little wary from the more modern stuff. But the older stuff, 70s and back, I wouldn't worry about.
Great. Brian was asking about printing and selling images in their gift shop at the museum. And I assume it depends on if it's things that they own the copyright to or if it is.
That I would stick directly with stuff that you own the copyright for. Then I don't think there's no problem. I mean, we own this wonderful collection. We don't have a store, unfortunately, but we own the Ginny Dellaccio collection, and she was a rock and roll photographer, took these very famous photos of Neil. Okay, the brain is just gone. Famous rock star Neil. Anyway, she did a number of famous photos. We could do whatever we want with them because we own the copyright. And so I would stay with things that you do know that, I would stay with that stuff.
Yeah. Or like you said, if they're older and again, right. Stay away from the soft ice. And Brian, Neil Young.
Neil Young,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Anne. And I think the last question, and Brian had actually sent this in an email ahead of time. They have a postcard collection in Leavenworth that he was wondering about. And again, that's something that may have a copyright, and so you might be able to use the hurdle chart. I don't know. Do you have any specific advice about postcards?
Yeah, I think postcards are kind of problematic. Sometimes they have a publisher. Sometimes when you read it, there actually is a publisher. And but I would look at the hurdle chart because, again, if it depends on the date. If it was published, then you're really well off, because if it was published and it was like the date on the thing is 1930, you're okay. So what I would do is kind of look through it, see if it says published, see if there's any photographer on it. And of course, it is really problematic because photographers would steal each other's work. So, we have this famous photo of Chief Seattle made by Samus in 1862. And all these photographers stole that photos. I mean, there are so many copies of that photo out there. He's in the studio, and there are so many copies by photographers who stole that. And that would happen with postcards. And, that would happen quite a bit with postcards. And so, I'd kind of look. Again, I would stay back into the historical ones, keep away from 50s and on, just because you don't quite know. And Yes, there are, by the way, sites that will tell you about approximately the date of a postcard by the paper, such as Dating Real Postcards, I think it's called. Plyle, Playle is a guy who has dating information. There are a number of sites that have dating information that's based on the paper on the back of the photo and what it looks like, and if it's a linen and so on. There's lots of, you can find lots of good information about that.
Oh, great. Well, I might try to find some of those websites to send along to everybody. Yeah. Oh, and Groover just sent one as well. A good site for helping figure out how old postcards are. The web footers was his suggestion.
Oh,
great. Thank you. Okay. Well, I think we got and stamps on the back. If there's a date on the stamp, then that's great. A postmark. Always helpful. This has been terrific. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer everybody's questions. I'm gonna sort of leave. Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Before I go, I'll give you my email. You're welcome to email me. It's very, very easy. It's NXB, like Nancy X-ray boy, NXB@uw.edu. And you're welcome to send questions.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicolette. And if anybody has any questions that come to mind this afternoon or maybe tomorrow morning, you can also send those to me, and I can send them in a whole chain so everybody can kind of see them, and Nicolette can respond when she has the chance. I do think we've uncovered this really interesting issue in Lacey, Erin, and the question that if I'm getting this correctly, is whether or not museum collections that are owned by a city are considered subject to public records. And I'm going to try and find out more information about that, because that's really intriguing to me.
One thing you have to be clear on, just because a museum owns a collection does not mean it's a public record. It could be a city museum, but maybe some private person gave the collection. So you have to be very careful. Just because it's in that museum does not make it a public record.
Yeah. This is what I want to I think it's much more complicated maybe than we're thinking. Yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Nicolette. And thank you so much to everybody who joined us today. Again, maybe tomorrow afternoon, look out for an email from me with the recording and some of those links that Nicolette mentioned and that you all shared in the chat. And again, if more questions come up, be sure to let me know. Otherwise, we'll hope to see you all on the 23rd for our conversation about virtual tours. And thank you so much. Thanks again, Nicolette.
Bye.
Bye.